Welcome to the Dropping Dimes podcast. Here's your host, J.I. Dimes.
Yes, sir. Welcome back to the Dropping Dimes podcast presented by you and Yes, to love and inspire, and also by Snuggle Moments PH. The snuggle is real. Kindly follow all of them on Instagram. So what's up, Dimers? So for today, we'll be talking about the 2020 NBA Draft. Yes, sir. So I'll be discussing the top 10 random thoughts that I had yesterday when I was watching the NBA Draft, and even after the NBA Draft. What are my thoughts about it? So that is what's up for today's episode. So yes, it was indeed a drama-filled draft yesterday, in spite of the fact that it was done virtually. So before we go to my random thoughts about the draft, let's go through first all the picks. Starting with, of course, the top pick in the 2020 draft, Anthony Edwards, taken by the Minnesota Timberwolves, the guard from Georgia. And then the Warriors at 2 took James Wiseman. The Charlotte Hornets, of course, regarded as the big winners of the draft, getting LaMelo Ball. And then, of course, the surprise pick at number 4, the Chicago Bulls took Florida State's Patrick Williams. That was the surprise pick. And then, of course, Cleveland ending up with Isaac Okoro from Auburn. Then probably one of the best stories in the draft, Onyeka Okongwu, drafted by the Atlanta Hawks, or going to the Atlanta Hawks, the center from USC. And then, of course, Detroit getting Killian Hayes from France. And then, of course, at 8, the much talked about pick by the New York Knicks, Obi Toppin. Of course, the New York kid himself, Obi Toppin, going to the New York Knicks. And then slipping to number 9, Deni Avdija of Israel, regarded as the best prospect ever to come out of Israel. He will be going to the Washington Wizards. And then at 10, for the Phoenix Suns, now with Chris Paul, they took Maryland's Jalen Smith as the 10th pick. And then the San Antonio Spurs, their first lottery pick in 22 years, Devin Vassell. Or according to the coverage yesterday, it has to be Devin Vassell, right, from Florida State as well, teammate of Jalen Smith. And then, of course, regarded as the steal of the draft, at number 12, Sacramento, getting Tyrese Halliburton from Iowa State. I had Halliburton at number 6, so for him to go down to 12, that's big. And then, of course, Pelicans, they Kyra Lewis Jr. at 13, the guard from Alabama. The Celtics got Aaron Naismith from Vanderbilt, the shooter. And then Orlando ending up with the top high school prospect last year, Cole Anthony from the University of North Carolina. And then this 16th pick, well, it started originally with the Rockets. and then went to the Blazers, and then eventually went to the Pistons. So the Pistons took Isaiah Stewart, the center from Washington. And then, of course, Oklahoma City, a team that has, like 17 first-round picks in the next 5 years. They actually got Alexei Pokisevsky, the forward from Serbia, that came actually from this one. Also started with the Timberwolves, then went to the Nets, and then went to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And then we have, of course, Josh Green from Arizona, the defensive specialist, going to the Dallas Mavericks. And then Villanova's Sadiq Bey going to the Pistons. This originally was a pick of the Nets, went to the Sixers, and then went to the Pistons. Then Precious Achua from Memphis is the guy of the Miami Heat at number 20. Well, we thought they would be going with another Kentucky guy in Tyrese Maxey, but then they got Precious Achua instead. But then Philadelphia at 21 took Tyrese Maxey. This pick originally belonged to the Thunder. Philadelphia taking the Kentucky guard Tyrese Maxey. Then at 22, Zeke Naji from Arizona will be going to the Denver Nuggets. This pick originally belonged to the Houston Rockets. And then at 23, pick originally belonged to the Knicks, then went to the Jazz, and then ended up with the Timberwolves. And the Timberwolves got Leandro Bolmaro, the guard from Argentina. So remember before, I think that was in the 2003 draft, and Carlos Delfino from Argentina as well went to, or was drafted in the first round. So Bolmaro from Argentina. And then, of course, at 24, this originally belonged to the Pelicans, and then went to the Pacers, and then eventually went to the Nuggets. We have RJ Hampton from, of course, he was originally going to go to one of the big schools, and then he decided to play in Australia in the NBL. And then, of course, another Kentucky guard at 25, Emmanuel Quickley. You know, arguably probably the fastest guard in the draft. This pick originally belonged to the Timberwolves, then went to the Nuggets, and then went to the New York Knicks. So New York gets their point guard. And then at 26, Peyton Pritchard from Oregon. Okay, the Pac-12 Player of the Year, going to the Boston Celtics. And then at 27, pick originally belonged to the Knicks, went to the Clippers, and then to the Jazz. We have Udoka Azubuike, the center from Kansas. Of course, this was kind of a surprise because of, the style of Azubuike. It's more of the old school style, or he's like an old school big, but then he still went to the first round. And then at 28, one of my picks for probable sleepers of the draft, Jaden McDaniels. So this pick originally belonged to the Thunder, then went to the Lakers, and then went to the Timberwolves. And then Malachi Flynn from San Diego State goes to the Toronto Raptors at 29. And the last pick in the first round, a pick that originally belonged to the Celtics, went to the Bucks, and then eventually acquired by the Memphis Grizzlies, Desmond Bane, the guard from TCU. And then, of course, let's now go to the second round. So for the second round, the Dallas Mavericks, this was an original pick from the Golden State Warriors. The Dallas Mavericks selected Tyrell Terry, the guard from Stanford. And then at 32, an original pick from the Cavs that went to the Charlotte Hornets. They drafted the big man from Duke, Vernon Carey Jr. And then at 33, an original pick by the Knicks that went to the Timberwolves and eventually ended up with the Clippers. They got Minnesota's Daniel Otoru. And then at 34, an original pick also by the Sixers that went to the Hawks and ended up with the Oklahoma City Thunder. They got Theo Maledon from France. And then, of course, at 35, original pick by the Kings, went to the Pistons and then to the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies took Xavier Tillman, the center from Michigan State. At 36, Tyler Bay of Colorado, drafted by the Dallas Mavericks. This pick originally belonged to the Sixers, then went to the Knicks and ended up with the Dallas Mavericks. So many of these picks just, getting traded all over. And then, of course, at 37, original pick by the Wizards that went to the Bulls and then ended up with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Vit Krejci from Czech Republic, the guard from Czech Republic. He's, watching the draft, man, this guy was like a 6-7 point guard, something like that. And then, of course, at 38, original pick belonged to the Utah Jazz, went to the Hornets, ended up with the Detroit Pistons. And that's Saban Lee from Vanderbilt, the guard from Vanderbilt. At 39, Elijah Hughes was drafted first from Syracuse. This pick belonged to the Pelicans, went to the Wizards, and then to the Utah Jazz. And then, of course, at 40, we have the Grizzlies. An original pick by the Grizzlies, then went to the Suns, and then ended up with the Sacramento Kings. Robert Woodard, the forward from Mississippi State. And then at 41, surprisingly, the San Antonio Spurs. Well, not that the San Antonio Spurs, I think this is kind of a steal as well. They ended up with Duke point guard Trey Jones, who was, of course, expected to go to the first round, but then he slipped all the way down to 41. And then at 42, an original pick from the Pelicans that went to the Hornets. So the Hornets will be getting Kentucky center Nick Richards. Reminds me a lot of Mikey Moore. If you still remember Mikey Moore, player from the 90s and then early 2000s. Nick Richards, very much like Mikey Moore. And then, of course, 43, Jamias Ramsey from Texas Tech was taken by the Sacramento Kings. And then the center from Montenegro, Marko Simonovic. This pick originally belonged to the Grizzlies, but then went to the Bulls. I think he's a draft and stash. We don't know. We don't really know with these European bigs. Remember Nikola Jokic was a second round pick once upon a time, but then he turned out to be a superstar. So is this their Nikola Jokic? I don't know. And then Milwaukee Bucks, coming from this pick originally belonged to the Orlando Magic. They got Louisville forward Jordan Nwora, also from Nigeria. And then the Portland Trail Blazers took CJ Ellaby, the guard from Washington State. And then at 47, this was an original pick by the Brooklyn Nets. And then it went to the Boston Celtics. And they took Yam Madar, the guard from Israel, a very close friend also of Denny Avdija. So I think he's also a draft and stash guy. Yeah, he's not expected to be coming over yet. So a great draft and stash pick there by the Boston Celtics. And then at 48, another steal. Yeah, I do believe this is a steal. This was an original pick by the Mavericks and then went to the Golden State Warriors. They took Arizona guard Nico Mannion. Remember last year at this very time? Nico Mannion was regarded to be a lottery pick before the NCAA season started. So he slipped all the way down to 48, right? So even in mock drafts, Nico Mannion was like being placed in the second round. But still, what if he pans out in the NBA? So that's a big steal for the Warriors, ending up with Wiseman and Nico Mannion. And then, of course, at 49, we have Isaiah Joe, the guard from Arkansas, going to the Philadelphia 76ers. Then we have at 50, Skylar Mays, arguably, based from the coverage yesterday, arguably the smartest guy in the draft. Off the court, he was like a two-time student athlete, all team, something like that, and taking up pre-med. So Skylar Mays, original pick from the Heat, going to the Hawks, the guard from LSU. And then the Warriors also took Justinian Jessup, the guard from Boise State. This pick originally belonged to the Jazz. And then I was also very happy here at 52, an original pick from the Kings going to the Houston Rockets. KJ Martin, aka Kenyon Martin Jr., of course, decided to not play college ball. Right? He played at IMG Academy. Gets drafted at 52, going to the Houston Rockets. And then Cassius Winston, of course, another probably top two best stories as well in the draft. He will be going to the Washington Wizards. He's the guard from Michigan State. And then at 54, the only pick of the Indiana Pacers, but then they ended up with Cassius Stanley, the guard from Duke. I actually said on Twitter that if Cassius Stanley entered, let's say, the 2008 draft instead of the 2020 draft, it's just like, hypothetically speaking, he would have been a lottery pick, just to show how much the game has really changed. And then, of course, the Los Angeles Clippers. This pick originally belonged to the Nets, went to the Nuggets, and then to the Clippers. They took Jay Scrubb, the guard from junior college, John A. Logan College. And then the Charlotte Hornets taking Grant Grillier from Charleston. The guy averaged 22 a game for Charleston. That pick originally belonged to the Boston Celtics. And then, of course, Reggie Perry from Mississippi State, the center. Original pick by the Clippers, and then went to the Brooklyn Nets. Then at 58, Paul Reed from DePaul. This pick originally belonged to the Lakers and then went to the Sixers. Drafted at 58. And then at 59, Jalen Harris from Nevada, taken by the Toronto Raptors. And then, of course, to end the draft, an original pick by the Pelicans that went to the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Bucks took Sam Merrill, the guard from Utah State. And Mike Schmitz actually called this guy as the Luka Doncic of that conference where Utah State played in, right? So he ends up now as the last pick of the 2020 NBA draft. So now it's time for us to go to my top 10 random thoughts about the 2020 NBA draft. So at number 1, even if the draft was virtually done, the emotions were still as legit as they come. And it was pure. I have to agree, man. I mean, the reason why I love watching the draft every year is because of the natural drama that comes with it. Yeah, it's so nice to see these young guys make it, and to see them thank the people who were with them throughout the process. It's so fitting to see them like thanking their dads, their moms, and then everyone who supported them throughout their journey, and now they made it. And it's a great representation of how you never make it alone, right? Like when you make it, you really make it with everyone else, with everybody or everyone who was with you. They also make it in the process. So that's the first one. And then, of course, at number 2, surprisingly, there weren't any blockbuster deals that happened. Yes, sir. We really thought there were going to be like tons of deals that would be happening in the draft. But nope, there weren't really. There weren't really a lot of, there weren't blockbuster deals. The draft went on as smoothly as it could. There weren't, maybe the only deal that really wasn't really considered a blockbuster deal. Seth Curry going to the Sixers for Josh Richardson, but then that's it. Of course, there were some picks that were traded. Let's say the 25th pick going to the Knicks, etc. And then they, of course, the Knicks started it off, and they ended up trading, right, so that they could get the 21st pick. Right? No, that not that pick, but the 25th pick rather, not the 21st, 25th pick, right? That's why they ended up with Emmanuel quickly. So there's really a lot of deals there. And then at number 3, the blue blood players, the so-called blue blood players, did not dominate this year's draft. And I personally still can't believe that the first Duke player that was drafted was taken at 32. Of course, that was Vernon Carey Jr. And then, of course, the first Kentucky player was taken at 21, Tyrese Maxey. We're so used to seeing these Duke players, Kentucky players going into the lottery. But then this year, ironically, they didn't dominate the draft. Okay, it speaks volumes to the kind of draft that we had. No, there wasn't really a particular franchise-altering player, but then there were so many good players that can have long careers in the NBA. And then at number 4, this is, in connection to that, there was no clear franchise-altering player yet. There were many good players that have the potential to have long careers in the NBA. So there was no like LeBron James or Zion Williamson or Tim Duncan, but there are going to be a lot of good players who will have good careers, good long careers in the NBA. And then at number 5, this is a special shout out. I was very impressed with Cole Anthony's honesty. He showed a lot of humility and gratitude when he got drafted at 15. Cole Anthony was, when he came out of high school, he was like the guy, right? He was the guy that represented the batch. It wasn't James Wiseman or any of these other guys. It was Cole Anthony. And that has been the case for many years when he was playing high school basketball. So for Cole Anthony, for me to see him like acknowledge that it has been really a tough year for him, that was big. It's so easy to like go down that road of saying, you know what, I'm gonna prove everyone wrong, blah blah blah. They made a mistake not taking me early. No, he didn't go that route, but rather he acknowledged that he had a tough year, and he's still very grateful grateful to his parents, grateful to the Orlando Magic for drafting him, even if it was outside the lottery already. And for me, that showed a lot about his character. It showed he was able to show humility and gratitude with the way he reacted after getting drafted. It was, it was so nice seeing that. And then, of course, at number 6, this is what I was referring to. Cassius Stanley ended up at 54 with the Pacers. And that's an indicator of how much the game has really changed. As I've said, if let's say you will be putting Cassius Stanley in the 2008 draft, that was the Derrick Rose, Russell Westbrook draft. Cassius Stanley would have been a surefire lottery pick if that was the case. But then, because of the way the game changed and focused not on athleticism per se, but more on skills and being able to shoot the ball, etc., Cassius Stanley ending up as a late second round pick. And exactly at 54 with the Indiana Pacers. And then, of course, at number 7, we have Tyler Halliburton falling all the way to 12, and Denny Avdija slipping to 9 were the major shockers for me. And because I had Halliburton going to the Atlanta Hawks at 6, and then Avdija at number 4 to the Chicago Bulls. But then, of course, this always happens every year. Now it's time for Halliburton and Avdija to, as always, make these people regret, or make these teams regret not drafting them. Then at number 8, yes, I made sure this was gonna be at number 8. Shout out to the 8 Nigerian players drafted. Take note, 8. These were Jordan Nwora, Udoka Azubuike, Isaac Okoro, Desmond Bain, Onyeka Okongwu, Precious Achua, Zeke Nnaji, and Daniel Oturu. Wow. 8 Nigerian players drafted. 8 out of the 60. Then at number 9, shout out as well to Commissioner Adam Silver, who is just so good at finding ways of making it work. He is indeed the best commissioner in sports. Adam Silver. Yes, sir. He's the perfect commissioner for the NBA, especially during these times of, the difficult times, to say the least. 2020 has really been tough, man. And good thing the NBA has Adam Silver. And then, of course, my final thoughts about the NBA draft. This is number 10. No summer league this year. Yes, no summer league. But then free agency is now officially upon us. Trade season has begun. And yes, sir, the season will start in a month. Okay, and we're all very excited for that. Of course, prayers up for my man, one of the best shooters ever, Klay Thompson. We'll be talking about that in the other episode for today. Prayers up for Klay, who ruptured his Achilles, his right Achilles tendon. Man, it was devastating. It's just devastating. So prayers up for Klay Thompson. So that is it for today's episode of the Dropping Dimes podcast by J.I. Dimes. Again, many thanks to our sponsors, Yo and Yes, Snuggle Moments PH, T-Shirt Printing Manila, Esquina Cebu NLEX, Gift Mall PH. Yes, and of course to our friends on Instagram, Super shout out to Shine Sport 2, to Anti Tawheed, to City Clothing Company, Uncommon Jerseys, Gregory Stokes, Aiden Berryman, Daniel Miles, all these guys, super, super supportive on Instagram. So again, we'll see you on the next episode. Keep safe, everyone. This is the Dropping Dimes podcast by Jay at Dimes.
Welcome to the Dropping Dimes podcast. Here's your host, J.I. Dimes.
Yes, sir. Welcome back to the Dropping Dimes podcast by J.I. Dimes. And for today's episode, we will be talking about loyalty. Yes, it's all about loyalty, and does it even still exist in the NBA? So that is what's up for today's episode. Loyalty. I think when we talk about loyalty, it's either we get this answer or we get this one. And why is that the case? Because it doesn't exist anymore. Loyalty is probably the biggest BS there is, especially in sports. Gone are the days that, a player stays for the whole franchise, regardless of the situation, regardless of the fan base, regardless if they're winning or not. Gone are those days. The Reggie Millers of the world, the Kobe Bryants of the world, the Larry Birds of the world, the Magic Johnsons of the world. Those guys just don't exist anymore. And it's funny because they used to be that way for so long. And yet, when let's say LeBron decided to take his talents to South Beach, it just kind of gave players that empowerment to decide where they want to be, where they want to play, what kind of contracts they will sign, because it broke so many barriers. Of course, LeBron had to take the heat, no pun intended, for what he did. But it really opened up this new culture that we have now in the NBA, wherein players are now able to decide for themselves on where they want to go, where they want to play, what kind of contract they will sign, who they want to play with. And so that so-called loyalty no longer exists. It's free agency time, and we see a guy like Montrezl Harrell who just won 6th Man of the Year for the Clippers. He felt like the Clippers didn't want him back, so he decided to go to the Lakers. You see a guy like Dwight Howard who said that he'll be staying in LA, but then decided, I'll just sign with Philadelphia. And it's not bad anymore. Kevin Durant took his talents to play for the Warriors with Steph, Clay, and Draymond. A lot of people reacted negatively on that, including me. But that was just a byproduct of players having the choice now to go where they want to be or where they want to play. Kawhi practically controlled the 2019 free agency. And again, if we all look at it, or we'll all look into the root cause of all of these things, it's really because of the one thing that has been bypassed. And that is the concept of loyalty. That term loyalty has been abused by these owners. The sort of blackmail players into staying, wherein the reality is they don't really have to stay when their contract is up. They can go wherever they want to. They are not indebted to a particular franchise just because the people there love them or just because they've been drafted there. If their contract is up, by all means, they can choose wherever they want to go. And this concept on loyalty being something like players don't have doesn't matter. Because these players have all the reasons and all the rights, for that matter, to do what they want to do with their careers. And you know how it sucks to see how biased it may be at times. Like when you're the one who's gonna do something for yourself, you're gonna be labeled as selfish. You're gonna be labeled as not loyal. You're gonna be labeled as a guy who, doesn't really have the right manners for that matter. Like that sucks, right? And yet when it's the franchise, or let's say when it's the company that screws you up, all of a sudden it's just a business decision. That it's nothing but business. That it's part of the business. That it's part of the overall picture of whatever shit there is. And that's why for me, this whole concept of loyalty, I'm very happy that it no longer exists. I'm thankful that LeBron taking his talents to South Beach happened because it empowered the players. It gave them the opportunity to tell these owners, you know what? Without us, you're nothing as well. You may have all the money in the world, but without these best players playing basketball at the highest level, no one's going to be watching the NBA anyway. And that goes with anything. So next time you're asked about loyalty, the only thing you should be loyal to is your faith and yourself. Not the organization, or not the company that would just get rid of you if they want to. So for all the players who have decided, you know what, I want to move on, I want to do what's best for my family, good for all of you guys. Because if there's anyone who deserves to have that power of choice. It's the people who are grinding to make it work. So that's it for today's episode of the Dropping Dimes podcast. Catch us again on the next episode of the pod. You can catch us on Anchor, Spotify. Again, many thanks to everyone who's been supporting the podcast. This is the Dropping Dimes podcast by J.I. Dimes. Yes, sir. Welcome back to the Dropping Dimes podcast. So for today's episode, we will be talking about one of my favorite players of all time, Derrick Rose. Yeah, Pooh, as he was usually called. And I'll be talking about why I grew up idolizing Derrick Rose. So that is what's up for today's episode. So Derrick Rose, it was like 2006 when, because I was always fond of, looking at these mock drafts and looking at the players who got next. But the first time I saw Derrick Rose when he was like playing for Simeon High School in Chicago, and I saw the highlights. At that time, highlights weren't really that easy to look up or to, it wasn't as easy as like going to YouTube and something like that. But then, man, when I saw these highlights of this guy, man, 6'4", pro body, even when he was still in high school, he just looked different, man. And I can remember when Slam released their, they had this issue wherein they were featuring these guys from this very, very strong batch of high school players. People have to remember that not all of them came out after 2007, right? So not all of them joined the 2008 draft. Some guys played 2 years in college, guys like Blake Griffin, James Harden, and they ended up in the 2009 draft. But all these guys, the OJ Mayos of the world, Michael Beasley, it was Eric Gordon, Kevin Love. It was this guy, Derrick Rose, who just looked so special, man. The athleticism was so amazing that I wouldn't really believe that he was in high school. Right? And then he went to Memphis. I can still remember watching their, Memphis and USC. Yeah, so they battled. He and OJ Mayo battled. So that was like watching the future at that time. When they were balling, it was like watching the future. And then we all know what happened that season, right? Derrick Rose led Memphis. His coach then was John Calipari. He had teammates like Joey Dorsey, Christopher Roberts, and they went all the way to the national championship game. they were supposed to win that game, right? If not for those free throws and the Mario Chalmers miracle shot that gave Kansas the championship eventually. And everything was, like a few months later, everything was removed from the history books because of the eligibility complaints about Rose. It didn't matter anymore because he was in the NBA. He got drafted first in the 2008 draft. And though he didn't really he had a very, very good rookie season, but it's not like he really exploded into the scene, right? He really made his mark though during the playoffs when they faced the Boston Celtics, and that series was arguably the best first round series for me personally ever. That series was so fun to watch, and I was fortunate that we were in the States then, and I was like, you're having this East Coast tour then, and I had a chance to really every time we're gonna be stopping by a hotel and then we're gonna catch the game on TV and seeing the Celtics without KG and then playing against the young Bulls, and then Derrick Rose was balling. Guys like Ben Gordon were still there and Joakim Noah. It was fun, right? It was like you just knew that Derrick Rose would be incredibly special. And then he went, we all know, in 2011, he eventually, aside from just being an all-star, the guy just, after the World Championships, just went from being a really good young player to being the youngest MVP in the league. Even though they got beaten by the Miami Heat in 2011, but it was like at that moment, even when they lost to the Heat, it seemed like this would be the guy who would be eventually the face of the NBA. Right? That was how it was. And then a year later, man, oh man, biggest what if in basketball history. What if Tibbs just removed them? They already were. Everyone knew that the game was over. Last 1 minute of that game, that drive and that no one was there and everyone knew it was serious. And that changed everything, right? ACL injury. Missed the whole season after that. Came back 10 games into it. Another knee injury, this time on the other knee. And it was sad to see Derrick Rose, never getting a chance to really live out what he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be one of the greatest to ever do it. Right? The youngest MVP in the NBA. It was sad seeing him get traded to New York. I myself thought that maybe Rose's game wasn't fit and to the way the game is being played, especially when Steph started emerging as a star and D Rose couldn't really, that wasn't his game, man. I mean, his game was really about athleticism, about attacking the basket. It wasn't like his game was never about outside shooting, right? And probably the lowest point when he went to the Cavs and then he got traded mid-season and got waived by the Jazz. And I was like so sad to see the guy working out in Cleveland, working on his floaters. People didn't really know where he'd end up with, right? Until Minnesota finally gave him a chance. So when D-Rose had that renaissance season where he even had a 50-point game and then reinvented himself, reinvented his game, became a better shooter, was more careful about how he attacks the basket. D-Rose is like the embodiment of grit, man. And that's why I love D-Rose. Things are hard, man. Things aren't easy right now. Just looking at that guy and looking at how many, downs he had to go through, and still he's there. Playing in the league, still balling, still finding ways on how to be effective. How can you not be happy for that guy, right? How can you not be inspired by that? He just loves the game so much that he found ways. He found ways on how to still be effective. And that's the reason why Derrick Rose will always be one of my favorite players. almost 10 years after winning this MVP award, yes, the career may have obviously taken a different route. It wasn't the route that we thought it would be. But the impact, you can never take away the impact of Derrick Rose, not just in the basketball court, but in the hearts of many of these, not just young ballers, but people who saw him go about it, who saw him fight through regardless.
Welcome to the Dropping Dimes podcast, and here's your host, J.I. Dimes.
Sir, welcome back to the Dropping Dimes podcast by J.I. Dimes. So for today's episode, we will be talking about something a little different. Yes, we'll be talking about local hoops and how we should appreciate the efforts of our young players more than hating on them. And that is what's up for today's episode. Yes, this is the first time I'll be recording something about local hoops. The podcast is really focused on the NBA and not on Philippine hoops. But then I just felt compelled to talk about this because I don't really like what's happening now on how fellow Filipinos are actually very, very hard on our young players. But in fact, these young players they're obviously trying their best just to be able to represent the country well, and to make it to the, to the big leagues. Of course, the ultimate dream is to make it to the NBA. So I'm going to be focusing on this issue, right? I'm really seeing that instead of just appreciating these young players, a lot of people are like bashing them and saying, negative stuff about them without really seeing the bigger picture. So I chose certain players as, examples. And again, I'm not doing this just to merely defend these young kids, but I'm doing this because I think that this is the right thing to do. We need to support them instead of criticizing them all the time or hating on them. So let's start first with the first players who people thought could actually make it. The first young players. In 2010, I can still remember very well. A kid named Ray Parks Jr. and another kid named Kiefer Ravena. They were regarded as the future of Philippine basketball. Ray Parks was, of course, the son of former 7-time best import in the PBA, Bobby Ray Parks. Then Kiefer is also a second-generation player. He's the son of Ravena. At that time, both of them were trying to decide on where to go. Ray Parks had an offer to play for Georgia Tech. Kiefer, at that time, there were rumors that he had an offer from Butler. They both had an NBA dream. They both wanted to make it to the association. But both of them decided to stay here. Ray Parks at the time decided to play for NU. For most, it was because his dad was sick that time. He wanted to make sure that his dad will be okay. And then for Kiefer, he's wanting to go and play for Ateneo. That was really the storyline there. But we all know that, looking back, it really changed the trajectory of their careers. It would have really been different had Ray Parks played for Georgia Tech or had Kiefer, let's say, play for Butler. It would have been different because they would have been able to play in the NCAA. They would have had a chance to develop in the States, not here in the Philippines. And then most importantly, they would have had the opportunity to get exposed or to get exposed not in a negative way, but to get the proper exposure so that they would, scouts would notice them. We all know what happened with Ray Parks, after winning the MVP awards in the UAAP, he decided to go back to the States. He was able to play in the Summer League, was drafted in the G League, got to play there, but then that was it. As for Kiefer, he had a very decorated college career and then tried his luck and was able to play in the Drew League and then was a practice player for the Texas Legends. And that was it. But then do I feel bad for these kids? Do I look at them as busts just because of that? Of course not. Because there was still the desire to make it. And they did everything that they could. They controlled, they handled whatever they could control. Balled out. And, left everything on the court. Just so happened it didn't make it. And then, of course, the next young player was Kobe Paras, who, of course, at this very moment is being is under the microscope for, I think, and it's been really unfair that he's been being criticized so much. This is the story on this, man. And people should remember what really happened. It was first and foremost. It's not like Kobe Paras when he was still playing in the NCAA juniors. It's not like Kobe Paras was dominating the whole league, right? He was still a work in progress at that time, and then they decided because of his size and his athleticism that maybe it will be best to go to the States, play high school basketball there, get scouted, go to a Division I school, etc. And honestly, it really worked out well, except for the last part wherein he was declared ineligible to play for UCLA because of academic reasons. But for a kid who was like 16 at that time to go to the States and play high school basketball there, that in itself was already super difficult. I mean, he had to battle against practically the top high school players in California. He had to make a name for himself. And the fact he was actually recruited by UCLA, that was already an achievement right there. For a kid who just came there, but still was recognized as a 3-star prospect, had his moments in those camps. Should have been a teammate of Lonzo Ball. This is what people should remember about what happened to Kobe Paras. When he had to leave, he was forced to leave UCLA and then transfer to Creighton. That in itself was already tough. Because that was not part of the plan. Leaving UCLA was not part of the plan. The plan was he would be playing with Lonzo Ball. He'd be playing in UCLA. Right? Just imagine, they would have been an Elite 8 team. He would have been able to play in an Elite 8 team. Well, Creighton did make it to the tournament, but Creighton also didn't use him much. Why? Because he was just an add-on. So he lost that year, didn't really play that much. And then he decided to leave Creighton. He had to sit out, right? He had to go back to California. I think that was like Cal State Poly, I think. Or Reggie Diaz was the coach. Reggie Diaz really liked Kobe Paras and the way he played. And then even before Kobe could suit up, Coach Diaz got fired. And so he lost another year. And then didn't really know what to expect, especially because his coach, the coach that brought him in, wasn't there anymore. Right? And then of course the infamous I'm going pro moment to that video that he had, and then everyone didn't really know what was next. Everyone knew he wouldn't get drafted. And so he came home, played for Gilas. A lot of people were very hard on how he wasn't playing much defense. Decided that he'll be playing for UP. And he had to sit out another year because of that. So just imagine the 3 most important developmental years of Kobe Paras as a basketball player, as a young basketball player, were practically gone because of these issues that he couldn't control. Right? So he lost all of the opportunity to grow. You have to remember that he was playing with guys like Bam Adebayo, Lonzo Ball, He was also batchmates with Jason Tatum, Harry Giles, Marco Fultz, right? Dennis Smith Jr. And yet, it happened that way because I'm not saying that if he got those 3 years, he would have been an NBA player. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that he lost 3 very important years. And if you look at his peers, those guys, boom. Tatum became a superstar. Adebayo became an all-star in the span of those 3 years. And what was Kobe Paras doing at that time? He had no choice but to sit out. And so when people were questioning how he was performing for Gilas during these past, most recent games, and people were like so hard on the kid, saying he was overrated, blah, blah, blah. I actually felt bad. Like, to see Kobe Paras still playing hard, competing, following Coach Tab, doing what is necessary for the team. I think that's more than enough already. For a guy who lost 3 years of very important, formative stages in his basketball career, he's still there competing, he's still there trying. And I think that's what people should see, right? And then of course the next one is of course the guy that we are all rooting for, Sotto. He's now playing for the Ignite team. Kai is like the embodiment of all the lessons learned from Kiefer, Ray Parks to Kobe Paras. And I'm happy that Kai got all the breaks so far. He has been getting all the good breaks. I heard recently from one of the, YouTube creators that he's now the number 3 center in the 2021 batch. So that's good to hear. And then he was also the thing that he just went to the States like a little over a year ago, but then he eventually made it as a 4-star recruit, as a top 100 player, and then going to the Ignite team. That speaks volumes of what Kai can do, right? And so instead of focusing on, because what I'm seeing is that some people are saying, Kai will not make it, Kai's going to go undrafted, Kai's going to be like this, he's just going to eventually end up in the PBA, whatever. I think instead of like saying those things, why not let's just support the kids, man? I mean, it wasn't easy for them to like go to the States. It's a new place, new culture. You have to grind, you have to compete, and you're carrying the burden of, having to live up to all these expectations. In the case of Kai, and even in the case of Kobe and Kiefer and Ray, who, are all getting unwarranted hate for, I don't really know where that hate is coming from. All I know is that those kids, all they did was to dream, man. They dreamt big. They put in the work. And that in itself is something to be proud of. So let's say in the case of Kai Sotto, I know he has a lot of things to work on. I know this G League stint will be a make or break thing for him. It's good that scouts can see him easily because of the fact that they are part of the Ignite team, that he's really so close to the NBA. But it can also be bad that they might, focus so much on what he cannot do and forget about the things that he can do. Right? That's how prospects slip in the draft when scouts tend to focus on the things that they cannot do more than the things that they can do. Just ask Donovan Mitchell, or you can probably also ask guys like Paul Pierce, Caron Butler, how they all slipped because of notions that they had this and that, or a bad knee, he can't play defense, etc. I hope that wouldn't be the case. I hope Kai would just continue working, continue listening to his coaches, and for us Filipinos, what we should do is support them, support the kid, support our young players, appreciate what they're doing, instead of hating on forever. What did these guys do to you anyway? Like, let's just support them, appreciate the fact that they're balling, not just for themselves, but for the country as well, to represent us as well. And that in itself is something to be truly proud of. Okay, so again, to guys like Ray Parks, Kiefer, Bobby Paras, and Kai Sotto, more power to you guys. Continue dreaming big. Continue grinding. Because in spite of all the hate, there are still many of us who appreciate what you guys are doing. So that is it for today's episode of the Dropping Dimes podcast. Again, you can catch the podcast also on YouTube. You can catch it on Spotify and Anchor. You can follow us also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.